Tonight we are continuing Frankie Fish and the Sonic Suitcase. We are up to chapter 13. A change of weather, a change of destiny. Frankie and Grandad made their way quickly through a nearby park. Grandad looking as though he'd got an obese elephant off his chest. "It's time to go back then, isn't it?" Grandad said, patting the Sonic Suitcase. "We stopped other me from giving young me advice, so he'll lose the race like last time and then everything will go back to normal." Hopefully. Yeah. Or will it? But Frankie was staring up at the sky with dread. Heavy storm clouds were moving rapidly across the Glasgow sky. "This is not good," he said, as it began to spit. "A bit of rain never hurt anyone," replied a chirpy Grandad. "It's good for the farmers." "Well, it's not good for the fishers." "Why's that?" replied Grandad. "You said that the last time you came here it was sunny, right?" Frankie asked. A freezing cold wind began to blow. "Weather changes all the time," Grandad said. "It doesn't mean anything." But he didn't sound so sure anymore. Frankie shook his head. "But it does. I've read about this. When different things happen in the same timeline, it means there's been some kind of simultaneity breakdown." Grandad looked over one shoulder, then the other. "I'm sorry, did you think you were speaking with Albert Einstein or something?" Frankie didn't smile. "This is really bad, Grandad. You don't understand." "Frankie, you're getting worked up over nothing," Grandad interrupted as thunder rumbled in the distance. He gestured to the Sonic Suitcase, where the battery was sitting at 42%. "We've done what we came to do. Now let's just get home before—" "You don't understand," Frankie said, raising his voice to compete with the gathering storm. "We've meddled with time and now the future is muddled." Cue thunderclaps as the two fishmen ran to take cover in a nearby rotunda. "Muddled?" Grandad repeated. He had lost all his chirpiness now, like a canary with laryngitis. "When you came back a second time to the same place, you messed with the time path," said Frankie tightly. "That made today more unpredictable. Think about it, Grandad. You landed the Sonic Suitcase in the wrong place without meaning to. The weather is totally different now than it was before. And young Alfie was asleep this time instead of answering the door," finished Grandad slowly. "You mean things are different this time just because we came back?" Frankie nodded. "And now that it's raining, anything could happen. They could cancel the big race entirely." Grandad went pale. "How about we go back home, and if it doesn't work we can come back and fix it again," he suggested desperately. Frankie sat down on a bench in the rotunda, exhausted by his own explanation. "That could make things even worse. The more we go back and forth to the same point in time, the more we destabilise the timeline and wear out the time patch." He shook his head. "No, we need to stay for the big race. We need to make sure it turns out the way it's supposed to." Grandad clenched his fists. Frankie knew this was not what he wanted to hear. The old man wanted to type those coordinates into that stupid computer and get them back to 2017. Frankie hoped he'd see that he was right. As the silence stretched out, Frankie remembered his conversation with Roddy and what he'd said at the end. He felt sick. He thought he was doing the right thing, but who knew how much damage he might have caused? Finally, Grandad nodded sadly. "We don't have a choice, Frankie sagged, relieved. "Nope, we really don't." He crossed his fingers for luck, and then helped Grandad to his weary feet. "The big race is just over an hour away, so we need to hurry across town. We just have to hope that the race plays out exactly as it did the first time around." Okay, and what's going on here? Mercifully, the rain stopped, though the skies were still dark and grey as Frankie and Grandad jogged briskly through the old streets of Glasgow. Now, Frankie had the edge on his granddad about time travel, but the old man knew the streets of his hometown like the back of an aging hand. I know a shortcut, he told Frankie, leading him to a pair of rather intimidating rusty metal gates. Leaves danced in the breeze, and the steel chain that held the gates together rattled loudly. Beyond them was what appeared to be an imposing school building. "We can squeeze through here," Grandad told his grandson with a cheeky grin. He held the gates apart as Frankie slipped through and then followed after him. Frankie wasn't exactly sure why, but once on the other side of the gates, Grandad suddenly had a spring in his tired old step. Whistling, the old man strode through the school grounds, pointing things out to Frankie, his favourite monkey bars, and then the football pitch where he'd once dreamt of playing for Celtic and eventually Liverpool. "This is great, Grandad," said Frankie, "but we need to get to the big race." But Grandad didn't seem to hear him. He pointed through a dusty classroom window and explained to Frankie that this was where he and his mate Lenny McGregor had once pranked their headmaster. "Mr. McGinley never saw it coming, the old fool," he smirked. Frankie was stunned. "You did pranks?" he asked, forgetting about the big race for a moment. It was like hearing that Old Man Harris had once sung a Beyonce song on X Factor. "Yeah, me and Lenny hooked up a dead rat on a fishing rod and lowered it onto McGinley's head as he was saying the morning prayers," Grandad said, a conspiratorial glint in his eye. He was bald, so it looked for a few seconds like he had a bad wig. Everyone loved it. Well, not McGinley, and probably not Jesus either. He chuckled happily and dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief. Frankie grinned, though he couldn't imagine himself getting so emotional about going back to school when he was 120, although actually Grandad was only 85. But maybe time does funny things to you, Frankie thought. Certainly time travelling does. Then, with a jolt, Frankie suddenly remembered why they were there. He tugged urgently at Grandad's arm. "The race starts in less than 40 minutes, so..." Yeah, I know," Grandad grunted as he led Frankie out of the school. "Keep your hair on." "One of us has to," said Frankie, but quietly, so that his nearly bald Grandad didn't hear. They kept walking at a good pace, down the street past some old factories billowing smoke and up to a building marked St. Mary's Hospital. "Let's have a breather," said Grandad, puffing loudly. Frankie looked at his watch. The big race start time was rapidly approaching and they needed to get to the speedway soon, but his Grandad did look like he needed a short break. "Okay, 1 minute," Frankie said, his jaw tight. Time, quite obviously, was not on their side. Grandad looked at the hospital entrance and then down at Frankie, his eyes twinkling. "I want you to meet, or at least see, the most beautiful woman in the world." Then he slipped quickly between the hospital's emergency department doors. "Grandad," Frankie screeched, following him into St. Mary's Hospital, "we do not have time to look at your old lady girlfriend." But he stopped short when his Grandad pointed out a pretty young nurse at the nursing station, her brown hair pinned up under a hat. As they watched, the nurse turned around to call for someone, and Frankie caught sight of some very familiar bright blue eyes. "Is that Nana?" Frankie gasped. Grandpa let out a little laugh. "Technically, she's still Nurse Mavis Hopley. She only becomes Nana Fish when I marry her and we have your father, and then your father has you and your sister Lou." He took 2 steps forward, but his grandson clutched his jacket. "Grandad," Frankie hissed. "No, you can't." "No, you can't. We can't. It's too risky, and we really need to go." Grandad looked wistfully at Nurse Hopley. "Just a quick hello?" "Remember the rules," grimaced Frankie. "That quick hello could change everything." "I guess you're right," Grandad said reluctantly. With this reassuring declaration, Frankie let go of his Grandad's jacket, but as he did, the old man raised the back of his hand to his forehead and crumpled to the ground.